This shows utter panic. The emergency of the global financial crisis of 2008 never ended. This is that car that was going down the road and suddenly hit a patch of ice and it started spinning out of control. And they're overcorrecting and then they're undercorrecting, and we're going down the road and they're trying to regain control, but they haven't yet. They're still making these panic moves as of today. And this is what, 2008? This is 15 years ago, right?
Oh, yeah.
15 years of out of control. And most of their efforts at trying to regain control pump the stock markets due to the way they are handcuffed by the Federal Reserve Act of only being able to buy certain financial assets that they have to buy through primary dealers, the largest brokerage houses in the world. The crash has not happened yet, but we are getting close. Hi, I'm Mike Maloney, and welcome to Bernankenomics, Financial Armageddon. I've got Alan Hibbard with me. Alan, how are you doing?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks. How are you?
Excellent. So, a bit of a sensationalized title, but I don't think it's inappropriate whatsoever. I think that people have to be very, very prepared for what is coming. And what I'm going to go over here is I'm going to show everybody that there has been an emergency going on since 2008. We've never gotten over it. And we have shifted from Keynesian economics to Bernankenomics. By the way, for all the people watching, I am coining this term right now. So if you ever hear anybody use Bernankenomics in the future, that came from me. So the first graph here, you've seen this graph before, and it's just the effective federal funds rate. And you can see things like, I want to point out here that in 1980, it was 9%, and then it was 19% right up here. So it went up 10%. And this looks like the largest move on the chart. But that is the amount of percent that they have increased or decreased. It isn't the percent change of the percentage. This is sort of hard to explain. Do you have any better way of describing the percent change of the amount of percent that they are adding or subtracting, Alan?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just think about going from 10% to 11%. It's going up by 10%, but one percentage point. So imagine going from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2. It's humongous. But going from 10 to
1 to 2 is 100%. From 10 to 11 is 10%.
Exactly.
And so this doesn't look as big as this. But one of the things that I've never shown before is I put this chart in, I've shown the rate of change before, year over year rate of change. But all I did was put this in logarithmic chart. And here, what you're seeing is this is that 10% rate of change. And each inch on this is that 10% amount of change, not rate of change. I am sorry. 10% amount of change. And each inch on each measurement on this chart, each inch is basically the 10% rate of change, the amount of change from your baseline to where you are today, instead of a number of percentage points that you are adding or subtracting. And what you see here is, the Fed going up and down. This is the 1% line. And you see that Alan Greenspan, when he started, he took the NASDAQ crashed, he went down to 1%, and then he took rates up to 5.25 from 1%. So it ended up at 5.25. And that's right about the same as here back in 1957, I think this is. And it's about the same distance that we've done in the 60s. But then you look at this increase here that goes from 0.1% to 5.25. And you see the scale of this. So from this one started at 1%, went to 5.25. So if you start from the 1% line here, this rise from the 1% line is the same amount as this one, but it's on top of this change from 0.1 to 1, which is a factor of 10. So you've got a factor of 10 times a factor of 5.25. This was just a factor of 5.25. So you can see that under Bernankenomics, everything is out of control. It's insane. And they are, what Ben Bernanke did was not, before Bernankenomics, they used to use interest rates and they would dial them up and dial them down, and they would try to be careful. Alan Greenspan did all of this in these slow measured steps. This is Alan Greenspan, and then he handed over the steering wheel to the dial to Ben Bernanke right about there. And then Ben Bernanke panicked, and he wrote a book called The Courage to Act. And the greater courage would be to restrain himself and not act. He thinks he's master of the universe. We've got a little clip of him that we'll play later with his actions that he took and his overconfidence, the arrogance that he shows. But here you've got Janet Yellen, and then she turns over but look at how long this took in comparison. Then she hands over the keys to Jerome Powell, and then he panics. And then look at that increase there. It is mind-boggling. And to show you some of so have you got any comments on this rate of change here that the rhythmic graph shows?
Well, yeah, I want to coin another term here, economic whiplash. I mean, like look at this chart. This thing's like all over the place. This is insane.
It didn't give you whiplash before Bernankenomics. It was like a car accelerating, and then you see an emergency and you hit the brakes, and accelerating and hitting the brakes. But this is like, this is like being shot out of a cannon, and then you do things like slam into a wall, So
I don't think the free market would have moved rates up and down so quickly. I guess that's all I'll say.
No, and the other thing is that they used to dial the interest rate up and down, and that was the Fed's influence over the economy. But here I show how Bernankenomics, this is the same Fed funds rate again. So that's not logarithmic. And then here we have bank reserves, the reserves of depository institutions. So these are the reserve accounts that every bank has at the Federal Reserve. So it's the bank's checking accounts at the Fed. This currency the public never sees or touches this currency. But we went from something, they got along just fine with, if you look at the data in 1960, there was $18.8 billion of reserves that the banks used at the end of the day to lend and borrow to each other and to do interbank settlements. They would send reserves from one bank to another to pay, and they would borrow and so on. And you see it go up to 22, 23. We'll hit 40. I think it hits 60. Yeah, we're in the 60s now, but back down in the 40s here. And then Alan Greenspan's response to 9/11, it goes up to 57. And then after we did QE, and QE, as you know, Alan, from researching the Federal Reserve Act and Bank of England and the Federal Reserve's website, the method of doing QE traps bank reserves. This is sort of a mirror image of the dollars. The Federal Reserve buys treasuries from one of the primary dealers, and can't pay the primary dealer because the primary dealer is not a bank. And so they have to pay the primary dealer's bank, which is usually a division of an umbrella corporation. But they pay the bank, and there's a brick wall inside the bank. On the back end is all of the banking being done with reserve accounts at the Fed. But the public can't see or touch those dollars, the bank is instructed to create a mirror image of those bank reserves of bank credit deposited into the primary dealer's account, and the primary dealer is paid for the, so this is a mirror image of the currency that was directly injected into the markets by buying financial assets such as mortgage-backed securities and US treasuries. But it gets trapped there. And what they did was they came up with new terminology. It's just like the NIH, the government, since the pandemic, has redefined things like what a vaccine is and what the definition of herd immunity is and things like that. So they changed the definition. So this is now called the ample reserves regime, where they've got a lot of these reserves. And before that, it was called the limited reserves regime, except there was no terminology before that because they didn't have to justify what they've done. But you can see that things are sort of out of control. And then when we look at just reserves, one of the things that you and I have been talking a lot about is reverse repurchase agreements, because this is a way of adding more bank reserves or deducting bank reserves. And it's a repurchase agreement for the listeners is a bank needs some bank reserves, and they will pledge a US Treasury or a mortgage-backed security to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve buys it and creates currency, bank reserves, when they buy it. So the bank reserves spring into existence, but that Treasury or mortgage-backed security is now on the Fed's balance sheet, but it's with an agreement that it's going to be repurchased by the bank in a day, a week, a month, or a year. Usually it's like an overnight. It's one day. So it's a short-term need for bank reserves to be able to pay somebody. It's liquidity. But it's just one more tool, another switch, as you will see, or button. We used to have this dial, interest rates, and then Ben Bernanke introduced all these buttons and switches and levers that he can pull, and it's become extremely complex. Any comments on this, Alan?
You know, I was just thinking on the previous slide about the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's like all these things pulling and like smoke and mirrors and inventing new technology, or terminology. Yeah, at the end of the day, that's all they can do is create these fake IOUs to owe each other and create the illusion of separation between different organizations. But at the end of the day, you can't print prosperity. All you can do is push things around to delay the inevitable. And you and I know what that is.
Right. And in the Wizard of Oz, what he's doing when he's pulling all those levers and pushing buttons and turning cranks and stuff, he's scaring them. So he's manipulating their fear. And this is part of what the Federal Reserve does, is they manipulate the greed and fear of the public. They're manipulating your mood. That causes velocity to change quite a bit. And it causes investors to make different decisions. And it's only when the curtain is pulled back by Toto, the little dog, and the public that is being manipulated gets to see the tools of manipulation, that the tools stop working completely. So once the public finds out how it works, this will stop working, and they won't be able to manipulate us. So it's very important for people to learn all of this stuff. So what we've done here is we've added to the bank reserves the repurchase agreements. Now, this is a reverse repurchase agreements. I'm sorry. A reverse repurchase agreement, the Fed takes one of its treasuries that it bought through open market operations, sells it to a bank, but it's through temporary open market operations. And that bank signs a contract, basically pledges to sell that back to the Fed is going to buy it back. And so when a repurchase agreement appears, it deducts reserves from the banking sector. So it's pulling currency out. But as they unwind it, and it has to be unwind, it's a contract that has to be undone someday. There are balances that are sitting there might be a whole bunch of these repurchase agreements that get rolled over night after night. And so they're sitting out there as an accumulated sum, but they all have to be unwound someday. And we're seeing them being unwound. And this actually, as they're unwound, it adds reserves. I can go and change the format or change the formula here, I'm sorry, to line 1 and go minus. And so looking at it from the Fed's perspective, you've got one way of looking at it from the bank's perspective, it's another way. So here we see these bank reserves being added back into the accounts at the banks of the primary dealers. But with the point of all of this is that there was a stability. This is the repurchase agreements. So this isn't the reverse repurchase agreements. This is repurchase agreements where the Fed, a bank needs cash. They want to make sure that there's a lot of reserves at the banks, and they do these overnight repurchase agreements. The Fed gives them cash. It's not cash, it's bank reserves, but dollars. And the bank gives the Fed a treasury. This is Alan Greenspan's worry about the Y2K bug, where they were worried about all of the computers flipping over to the year 2000, and the computers, most of them only used the last 2 digits. They didn't incorporate a 4-digit date. And so he was worried about everything crashing and basically thinking that it was the year 1900, not the year 2000. And so he was preparing for that. This is the response to 9/11. So that's September 2001. That's loading up the banks with all the reserves for 9/11. And then we've got the global financial crisis and Ben Bernanke's panic. But then he shut this off like it was a light switch, and we had zero. And then I think this was Jerome Powell here by the time we ran into a crisis in the repo markets in 2019, and then the response to COVID, and then he shuts it off. So these things are being flipped on and off like a switch instead, and that shows to me panic. Have you got anything to say about this chart?
Yeah, I mean, they just move from one lever to another, one button to another, and they're just doing what they can to keep everything afloat. It's only a matter of time before the buttons don't work.
Right. I see this, and I see stability here. You're driving down a road. You've got everything under control. You hit a little puddle or something here with the Y2K bug. 9/11. You hit some gravel going around a corner, and then the global financial crisis, and you've hit a patch of ice. And now we are spinning down this mountain road out of control, overcorrecting, undercorrecting, and the crash has not happened yet, but we are getting close. So this is the reverse repurchase agreements in total. Hi, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for subscribing and mention that if you'd like to help our channel, please consider my company, GoldSilver.com, the next time you buy precious metals. We're one of the most trusted names in the industry. Our prices are sharp, delivery is fast, and we have an insiders program where you find out exactly what I'm doing with my own investments. Thanks for making GoldSilver.com your dealer, and now back to the video. We are getting close. So this is the reverse repurchase agreements in total. And what you see here, this is a tremendous scale. I mean, you're talking about zero back here. So this is stability. You're talking about the global financial crisis, $24 billion. Then something happening in 2013, 14 that requires intervention into the repurchase agreements and reverse repurchase agreements markets between the banks. And this is the response to the crash during COVID. But then what happened in March of 2021, where this expanded from zero to $2.4 trillion? that the Federal Reserve pulled out of the system. They pulled $2.4 trillion out of the reserves, and they gave the banks all of this high quality collateral, US Treasuries. I don't know what is happening here, but since May of this year, just since May of this year, they've gone from 2.25 trillion, let me see. Yeah, it's more than 2.25 trillion, down to 0.8 trillion. This is enormous. These moves are huge, and it just shows, again, out of control. So this is pulling reserve. When this rises, dollars are vanishing from bank reserves. When this falls, dollars are appearing in bank reserves, and it has to fall eventually because the banks have taken a treasury, a treasury or a mortgage-backed security, and promised to pay the Federal Reserve back with interest. So they want to pay this off. They want to get rid of that eventually. It can't go on forever. So these dollars have to be shoved back into the system, back onto the bank's balance sheet. Got any comments on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's another example of the economic whiplash. It's not just something shooting up, which is what we see on some graphs. It's shooting up and crashing back down. And that's true of the Fed funds rate, repurchase agreements, and reverse repos, which we see here. Everyone is shooting up at a record high and shooting down at a record speed as well. So it's a huge whiplash. It's crazy.
It is crazy. So here we have U.S. Treasury bills. So these are the short-term treasuries. And you can see, if you go back, we had stability. This had climbed steadily for decades and decades. This was just part of the Fed's balance sheet. And then Ben Bernanke decides to get rid of all of them, down to zero. So this is no longer part of the Fed's balance sheet. And then Jerome Powell decides, well, yes, it is again. Any comments on this? One's in the book.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen this one before. You and I have talked about it quite a bit. I mean, depending how quickly we'll see here in the next year, I mean, if this comes crashing back down again, it'll be yet another one that drops at a record low. So time will tell, but it's really the same story.
So here we are at 0.325 trillion, 326 billion, and it's already down at 226 billion, basically. So it's dropped by $100 billion since August of 22. So these are fairly short periods of time for these enormous moves. And so here, now I've had to play with some of the scales for people watching. I'm not trying to create a lie here. All I want you to do is look at how the Fed is panicked. This shows utter panic. The emergency of the global financial crisis of 2008 never ended. This is that car that was going down the road and suddenly hit a patch of ice, and it started spinning out of control. And they're overcorrecting, and then they're undercorrecting, and we're going down the road, and they're trying to regain control, but they haven't yet. They're still making these panic moves as of today. And this is what, 2008? This is 15 years ago, right?
Oh, yeah.
15 years of out of control. And most of their efforts at trying to regain control pump the stock markets due to the way they are handcuffed by the Federal Reserve Act of only being able to buy certain financial assets that they have to buy through primary dealers, the largest brokerage houses in the world. Any comments on that one?
I just thought for a minute about why the Federal Reserve officially exists. It's the dual mandate to create price stability and maximum employment. And I'm looking at these numbers like, how does this affect either one of those things?
Exactly. This is just a total disaster, but it's not just a disaster. It's a disaster still waiting to happen, because what all of this has done is it has warped the economy. We don't have the warpage is bigger than at any time in history. The bubbles I was the one that coined the term the everything bubble. Everybody uses it now. Then I tried to coin the term the almost everything bubble, and almost nobody uses it except for a few people in the precious metals sector, because compared to the currency supplies and everything else that they've inflated, and the condition that the world economy is in, the gold and silver are the only assets that I can identify that are fundamentally undervalued compared to everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I use the phrase the almost everything bubble, thanks to you. So because there's pretty much always something that's going to be undervalued when other things are overvalued.
So Keynesian economics, Bernankenomics. This is all Bernankenomics. And it's absolutely insane. This was all based on all of the ideas that Ben Bernanke put in. He outlined a lot of this stuff in his 2002 speech, Deflation, making sure it doesn't happen here. So the effects that this has had on the monetary aggregates, the bottom line is actual cash, Federal Reserve notes, currency in circulation. The black line is the bank reserves on top of that. It's base currency. So you've got monetary base. The red line is the monetary base plus the reverse repurchase agreements. Monetary base, M2, and I had to make that times 1,000 because you've got things here that are measured in millions and things that are measured in billions. And 1 billion on this scale here would just say 1. Unless it's measured in millions, then it would say 1,000. So we have to actually multiply billions by 1,000 to get it to have the extra zeros so that these things all line up. But I wanted to put this on the same scale, and look at everything is just out of control, totally insane. This is going to come back to haunt us probably in 2024. If they, it's an election year, they're going to try and put this off until 2025 when it's somebody else's responsibility, or when the re-election has already been secured. And it doesn't matter if everything falls apart because, it'll be the second term then for Biden, or if somebody else wins, it's their first term, but it's the other party's problem. So they're going to try and hold this together. But I want to remind everybody that that 2008 was an election year as well, and everything fell apart while George Bush was still in office. And so they always try and put off, but it was his second term, basically. So he didn't have as much to lose, but the Republican Party was still trying to keep everything together back then. So we've got we're looking at it from the other perspective this time around, but sometimes they just can't control this. Sometimes the economy is so warped that the energy that's built up can no longer be contained. And it looks like we are at one of those inflection points today. And so any comments on this, the monetary aggregates? By the way, one of the comments I need to make, this one can vanish. And if you watched, if you haven't watched our analysis of the book, The Great Taking, you need to watch that. This is sort of an extension of that. We've covered the velocity of it's M2 velocity mostly that we were covering, but we've covered velocity. And in that book, they're talking about a deflation. And what will happen in a deflation is a lot of these dollars here are going to vanish. Those dollars will vanish. These dollars will vanish. These dollars are printed dollars that you can actually have at home or someplace that you can get to them that don't vanish. And in a deflation, they gain in purchasing power instead of being a dumb thing to do. I always have, I've shown it a couple of times, a big stack of bundles of 20s and bundles of 100s. So I've got a month or two of expenditures that are completely covered by a stack that I can get to of cash that is outside of the banking system, because this is nothing but digits that are IOUs for those Federal Reserve notes. It's bank credit. And the black line, you never see those dollars. Those are bank reserves. But they spring into existence at a moment's notice and they vanish at a moment's notice. It's not money, it's currency. Well, this too is currency. It's a fiat currency, but it's the one that can't vanish, and it will gain in purchasing power. So for me, I hold mostly precious metals that can't vanish. They're nobody else's liability. That green line is still somebody else's liability, the Federal Reserve's liability. That's the reason it's called a Federal Reserve note. But it isn't one that is going to vanish until they make them illegal. If CBDCs come out and everybody gets on them, they will eventually make Federal Reserve notes illegal and they will be worth nothing. Showing again that they are not money, they are currency. Any comments?
Yeah, just basically when we think about all these currencies, they all go to zero when the issuing authority either declares or is forced to admit that there's no value there. And this is true of a government, a bank, any authority, a company, your favorite arcade, right? They might issue tokens and say, yeah, these are good for one game. But then if they go out of business, we say, okay, we can't honor those arcade tokens anymore. And
right. Yeah. So basically, the things you mentioned where they could say they're not going to honor them anymore, that they're worthless, or bankruptcy. And insolvency is something that can happen to the Federal Reserve, and it can happen to the U.S. The only thing that is nobody else's liability is, you've got to have the only real estate is a hard asset, but it still has a counterparty risk in that there are taxes due. Gold and silver are the only financial assets that you can hold that are no one else's liability. So with that, I want to say that we covered a lot of this in the book, and people may want to pick this up and watch that video on the Great Taking, because it looks like things are getting closer and closer. And in my first book, I said that we can't just go straight into inflation or hyperinflation. When I released that book, everybody was saying inflation or hyperinflation. It didn't happen except in financial assets and real estate. Real estate had just deflated because of the financial collapse. But everybody was saying inflation or hyperinflation. And I said, that's not the way it works. The big boys always win, the ones that are running the game. So it's the house in the casino. It is the house that ends up winning. If you go straight into a hyperinflation, you get to pay off your mortgage with just a few minutes of work. That isn't the banks winning. In order for the banks to win, if you've got everybody out on credit, that's when you have to have a deflation. And in a deflation, you can't sell assets because your assets are underwater. You owe more on them than you can sell them for. And so the banks get to take them, and then they get to sell them. And they've got both all of the payments that you have made and the value of owning the house and renting it or selling it. And so it requires some sort of big deflation when everybody is in debt. And what has happened in just the past few years, because of zero interest rates, we all took on a lot of debt. And then the lockdowns and the government sent cash, and people felt better. And they spent some of that cash when the lockdowns were lifted, and we saw a big inflation. So prices are now up. The cost of living is now up. But did you get a matching raise? And the answer to that is almost no. It's no for almost everybody. You didn't get a raise to compensate you, so your cost of living has gone way up. And what we've seen recently is debts increasing, credit card balances increasing. And now we've got the resumption of student loan payments. The forbearance on that is ending. The forbearance on mortgages is ending. And so people's cost of living has gone up. Their salaries didn't go up. And now they've got to make all these payments again. And that cash that they were sent out during the pandemic is gone. So now they're trapped with the highest debt levels ever. A deflation now, like the Great Taking is predicting, is exactly what I said in my first book and in episode 6 of Hidden Secrets of Money. So I think that is what looks like is going to happen sometime in 2024. Any comments?
Yeah, I would just say that, everyone should get prepared, get educated, and ignorance is no excuse, so get going.
Learn as much as you can, as fast as you can right now, because we are approaching something scary. And the people that that can figure out how to navigate this will do very, very well. So that wraps up this one. Please like, subscribe, and smash that notification bell. Alan, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Mike.